Hello and welcome to Marginalia. Today we're taking a look at the Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky, and more specifically a certain chapter in his book The Brothers Karamazov, namely the Grand Inquisitor. Before we focus on the chapter at hand, let us first establish some of the most important characters in the novel, since their beliefs and viewpoints will be important in the discussion moving forward. First off in this colorful cast, we have the father of the Karamazov brothers, Fyodor Karamazov himself.
I suppose you expect immortality for yourself.
He is portrayed as a rich and womanizing drunk, who had very little interest in raising his sons, which led to them growing up apart from each other. The youngest of his sons is Alexei.
Why involve him?
The author himself identifies Alexei, who is often called Alyosha, as the hero of the novel, albeit an insignificant and very commonplace hero. A deeply pious and devout young man, he is initially a novice at the local monastery. His older brother, the middle brother, is called Ivan.
Most men must have something to believe in, something more powerful than themselves, and as there's no God, they invented him.
Ivan is an intellectual, an atheist, and as such works as a contrast to Alexei's deep and genuine faith. The relationship to his father is one of deep contempt, and for much of the novel, this is also the case when it comes to his relation to his older brother Dmitri.
Give me 10,000 rubles now, and I'll never bother you again.
Much like his father, Dmitri is fond of partying, drinking, and of course women. What drives him to reconnect with his family, and his father in particular, is to seek an inheritance which he considers his own. It is worth noting that there might be a fourth brother, Pavel Smerdyakov, who is rumored to be the illegitimate son of Fyodor Karamazov, and who is employed as his servant. But for the sake of this video, he's not of great interest. Now, on to the chapter at hand, the Grand Inquisitor. The premise is that Ivan and Alyosha have met at the local inn, the day before Ivan intends to leave the town for many years to come. He feels the need to see more of the world, Moscow and Europe, but first he wants to connect to his younger brother, and the way he chooses to do so is over dinner and through a discussion and a parable about faith, cruelty and freedom. And so Ivan begins to tell a story he has made up but not written down. In order to summarize this chapter, we first have to introduce two additional characters. One of them is the titular Grand Inquisitor.
But tomorrow I shall condemn you and burn you as the worst of heretics.
He is the leader of the brutal Inquisition in Sevilla, on a daily basis burning people at the stake for heresy, and his monologue takes up a major part of the poem. The second character is Jesus Christ himself, who doesn't need further introductions. Though what is worth noting is that Jesus in this story is almost completely silent, acting as an antagonist to the Inquisitor and being judged only by what he did and said in the Bible. So the story Ivan tells starts out by Jesus returning to the world in Sevilla at the time of the Spanish Inquisition. The people of the town recognize him, he performs a few miracles, including resurrecting a little girl, and is hailed as a savior. The leaders of the Inquisition show up due to the commotion, they arrest and sentence him to be burned the following day. The same night, the Grand Inquisitor visits him in the cell and begins to explain to Jesus why neither the people nor the church need him anymore, and that his return is doing harm to the work the church is trying to do. What follows is a great monologue, and if you have the opportunity, you should just go ahead and read the chapter, if you can get your hands on it. It's merely 20 pages or so. And while you're doing that, go ahead and read the rest of the novel too, because this chapter kind of acts as a hinge, a point of argument that resonates with the rest of the book. The Grand Inquisitor's monologue touches on such things as the greatest good for humanity, the value of freedom or being well fed, the impossibility of living in accordance with Christ, and the Church allying themselves with the devil for the benefit of the church followers. During all of this, Jesus listens in silence, and in the end of the poem, he simply kisses the Inquisitor, who promptly opens the door to the cell and lets Jesus walk out and disappear into the night, instead of having him burned by the people of Sevilla. The story of the Grand Inquisitor is of course a stark criticism of organized religion, and further it could be seen as an attack by Ivan on his pious younger brother. But it is not necessarily so, because when Alyosha asks Ivan if he stands by these ideas, Ivan simply blows it off as merely a student's confusing poem. He has simply taken an idea and constructed it as solidly as he can. And really, this is what Dostoevsky himself has done with the Brothers Karamazov. He has constructed characters that are not simply ordinary prototypes, but fully fledged psychological beings with their own ideas and ideals. This is what Mikhail Bakhtin, a Russian literary theorist, called polyphony. His primary example of this idea are the novels of Dostoevsky, who doesn't use his characters to convey a single vision or reduce them to a mouthpiece for his own discourse. Because what we must keep in mind is that Dostoevsky himself was a deeply religious man, but that doesn't stop him from including strong and solid arguments for atheism, as represented by Ivan's discourse. In fact, Dostoevsky sent a letter to a friend where he expressed worry that he had constructed the arguments against Christianity and religion too strongly, they are simply too solid. And this is true of every character in the book. Their words and dialogue are truly their own, whether they are morally upstanding people or not. This allows the perspectives and characters to clash on an even playing field, and the reader, rather than the author, is left to leave judgment and think for themselves. This is really an idea that we can use in our everyday life, when arguing with people with different ideas and perspectives. The polyphonic novel can teach us to not reconstruct arguments from the other side so that they appear as fragile as possible in order to beat their worst arguments with our best, or what in rhetorics is called a straw man. But we should rather interpret the opposition and their arguments in the best and strongest way, both as a principle of charity and in order to be intellectually honest with ourselves. And in doing so, we are making an Iron Man out of them, rather than a straw man.